in sonics that, yes, thank you, I would like also to respond to, revibrate to. Maybe I would talk from my experience on the exhibition that I had a view on just before coming here. The exhibition, Ivana, that you are having at our space, Heavy Contemporary. And something that made me reflect much about was, how can it be, and this is a question to us all, that we reflect on perception in one dimension, the sight, the eyes.
Sensorial dimension.
I don't know. Well, I mean, you say sensorial, and that's the question that I have. Yeah. How can you, because this whole exhibition is very much centered, if not reduced, to what we can see, to the sight. There is a light room with light, and then there's a dark room where it is dark, and when you move, as you move, you can see circles. How about a room where there is sound, and this sound means seeing? This is my question, and this is why I say, can we even perceive when we focus and we extract one element of sensing from all the other elements? And one thing I found interesting in the dark room is that exactly also one part that you mentioned in the book about this is that the mind is moving. This I found interesting. My question is, where is the mind? And I think the perception I had was that the mind in that exhibition, in that research, is still very much located in where the long tradition of Western philosophy places it, in the brain. And I would like to talk about the mind, which is in the heart, which many ancestral cultures relate to, in ancient Egypt up to now. I remember my professor in Rwanda who told me that, I know I need to focus here, but it's difficult to... Louder? Okay, I want to say it's difficult to talk to someone you don't see. That's why I talk to the ones I see here in the physical space. But I remember my professor when I told him that that was, I think, 2 years ago, that I'm now researching independently about the heart, the ontology of the heart in the Rwandese philosophy, based on Alexis Kagame, Rwandese philosopher. That I would like to understand what even the ones who go out of the dual understanding of perception, the ones which would be inside a research called phenomenology. But I would mainly say Merleau-Ponty, because Husserl was still very much focused on the consciousness, and even him was so much located in the visual. You know, when he researched on paintings, Cézanne and Paul Klee, and his lifetime question was, where do we perceive? How do we perceive? And of course, also in his research, the stroboscopic view was very important, because he said every perception is stroboscopic. It's instant, that you cannot really talk about something, what you see as past or future, because it's always now. And this I found interesting, and still, even in the late, the posthum book, The Visible and the Invisible, where he talked about that everything we see comes from what we don't see, that the form is conditioned by what is all around it. You know, so this I found interesting, and still, even if he talks about the flesh, I think, and I have to say also that when I read about Pan-African philosophy, I thought that something that in the beginning of the 20th century was talked as something which is new, the phenomenology, was actually ancestral philosophy, something which has been, do you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, but there is
There's a song?
There's another mic that was on. It's
okay, I can continue?
Yes. Sorry.
No, I think we need to say that Western philosophers got a lot of their tradition of doing philosophy from ancient philosophers. What they don't say, although, for example, Platon was writing it in Phaedrus, for example, or Herodotus, the historian, was saying that Aristotle and many further philosophers from the Greek tradition was getting their knowledge from there. So what I wanted to say is that sometimes things are cut, but if we can remember that perception was something which was located into what is the vibration and what is the heart, and that our heartbeat in relation to our breath is 1/4, that in 1 minute we breathe 18 times in and out, and that our heartbeat goes 72 times. And if we look at how the world's, the Earth's rotation around the sun is in 1 minute, 1/4, if we have 30, 60 degree, and we have one day, 24 hours for a whole rotation, and 24 hours, it's 60 minutes by 60 minutes. I think it's 1,440, and if you have that in 1 minute, it's like 0.25, like 1/4 of a minute. It's responding to the 1/4 of how our heart and breath resonates. So this is my question: the perception that we can, if we can talk about the perception of the vibration, which is neither the eye nor the ear, but something in between, which is then the contact zone. Yeah.
I think when the presentation of Sangeetha Menon, that you unfortunately missed it because you were lost into this other dimension, we were exactly talking about reconsidering also the words that we're using and the concept that we're using. So instead of talking about brain, she said it's important to instead talk and think about being. And then instead of thinking about duality or non-duality, we should really just go beyond and reconnect to all the philosophies of transcendence that are so fundamental, for example, in Indian philosophy. And she was referring, because of her studies, her culture, her education, to the Vedanta, and how much this is absolutely fundamental, and it has been, of course, erased in Western science, this contact that goes beyond phenomenology as embodiment. And she was talking about enwordment, so being one with the word. So maybe Ivana, yes?
Just because I remember what my professor replied when he said I should look at our proverbs, one which says, out of sight and close through the heart, which is, I think, quite the opposite of a German proverb saying, aus den Augen, aus den Sinn, out of sight, out of mind. And he says, if you are in a dark room and you cannot see because our view doesn't allow it, it's limited, through your heart you can see, which I found very interesting. If you can go on with it.
But it's also curious because, again, going back to one of the primary points, I think, of these topics on multidimensionality, on Ivana's work in particular, there's the unlimited subjectivity, so that what you experience, of course, will be different than what I experience, will be different than what I hear, what I think, what I feel in relation. And Bonaventure, when he experienced it just 2 days ago, he was expressing a sense of fright, a sense of being overwhelmed with the intensity. Whereas I maybe felt that for some moments, but I was quite in love with the experience of the sensorial in the flickering lights installation in particular. But again,
yes,
so many different reactions.
Yes. However we respond, I don't mean that subjectivity, that of course everyone has a different reaction to something. But I talk about that we cannot talk about perception when we just focus, and not even focus, but kind of just limit it to the eyes. And I was thinking about the Mary experiment in the 80s. There was this debate, philosophical debate. Mary, a scientist who's just in a black and white room, and gets every knowledge about what is red and all this, and we know that. And then the question was, can she, when she goes out of that black and white room, can she then really, when she sees red, also understand it? And some said yes, and I said maybe it's not the question, because it's I think it was one of the precursors of what we talk about now, the artificial intelligence. You give all the databases to this person, like the person I listened to before in the web experiment there,
Tomas.
this voice, you know, coming from a computer
Synthesized
algorithm.
voice.
What was lacking there was a frequency, the undertones, the higher and the lower frequencies. This is what I talk about.
Maybe for this, Ivana, yes, can respond a bit.
I would just like to say about this nice room, black and white room. So basically, the question here is if by the absence of actually experience, she can have enough knowledge, if she read everything, to know what red is when she sees it. So, and this basically is referring a little bit or connecting a little bit with Taita. Stokes was saying that not all knowledge is in books, but we have to experience it through some other types of vibrations also. So, but in terms of visual, like dissecting actually the sensorial, dissecting the different senses and talking only about visual. So I think it's of course not possible, because actually
we are embedded.
Yeah, you know, like it's what you see is affecting your whole body, and how you hear and how you smell, like it is affecting everything, and the other way around. So if the installation is a silence, or if there is some background sound, then it's like everything is changing actually. But what I'm interested in, like, and maybe this is why you are saying that there is a lot of relationship with the brain. There, I am actually interested in vision scientists and how they are exploring visual perception. So in this sense, they are reductive, and I'm also in this sense reductive, that I try to understand like what exactly happens.
Because you address that particular.
Yeah, addressing exactly, but it's not. It's basically part of research, but I would not really at all limit the experience of installation to being focused to only the visual. I think like this question that you mentioned of the movement.
Now, sorry, we had a black hole entering in our room. It was actually simply no more power. In all senses, I think we're also quite exhausted, and now you start to see me as well. So, oh, good.
Maybe just a small comment.
We can also continue the discussion without being online, because I have the impression we could continue for hours. But to what are you saying? Yes, true. Ivana tries to more specifically address the visual realm to actually challenge and trouble the vision of scientists that are in some way reducing to this very objective knowledge. So the conversation that she has since a decade or more with these scientists are to enhance other dimensions that they are, of course, reducing because they do their scientific research. They want to find their universal grounding principles, their objectivity, their truth.
I would just reverse what you said before, that not every knowledge is in the book, but actually what came in the book comes from the experience. So it is not possible that I can just understand something when I read a book. That's why that
was the main.
Yeah, but not all. I would say nothing that comes this is just written is something that I can understand. And I think for me, I relate to the whole dimension of Western understanding and how it reduced further cultures by saying, for example, history related to linearity in the Western conception, history related to continuity, to frequency in the non-Western cultures. and how, for example, Alexis Kagame says, if Hegel's idea, one is not in the history, because for him history is what is written, what is seen, what is seen, where there's evidence. Then what do you do when you just see in a book something, but we are no more there? He says that just take out the vital dimension of a culture, and you will never talk about it anymore. Understand? This is a different way of approach, which I think would be interesting if you look at how does hallucination come across, not only from the brain, from this dimension, but from the holistic experience, which I think you're interested in.
Okay, I would like to now actually introduce Israel, who is a part of the Limits of Perception Lab, and as a part of this project, he actually did installation Dreamscape, which is as you were suggesting, which is actually working with all the different senses. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes,
so he
about
is
the sound
actually
that
in
you
this
implement.
sense, like addressing all the senses, also working with the sense and.
Yeah, I was actually.
Come to the front, otherwise it's difficult to hear.
Okay. Yeah, I was also interested when you were mentioning about the vibrations and like kind of different types of vibrations, and yeah, I was exploring a lot with this, like just pure tones, and like basically one of the things that I do is like not put it into like a sound system, but more like into a vibration system. So it's like kind of you feel it not by listening but by touching, but it's still sound, and at some point the sound comes out, but also you can feel it. Yeah, what else? So this was interesting to actually I don't know, for me it was a bit, I was wondering why immediately, like the situation that there's no sound started to become a lack of sound. But I don't think you mentioned like lack of sound, but the situation that is silent and not visual. And I don't know, I mean, for me also silence is somehow sound, no?
But you're talking about in regards to your dreamscape experience, so how much sounds are also enhancing your dreaming together with the smell, because you work a lot with smell a lot.
I think that's the thing. It's not about how the sound enhances, but somehow how like all of these combinations of what is there kind of tunes you into some state that is not necessarily dreaming, that is not necessarily sleeping. It's more like kind of a moment, or like a different state of attention or a different state of concentration. And then somehow, I don't know, maybe you start tuning to that vibrations, maybe, I don't know.
So that said, maybe as a finale for Ida, for Tomas, for Sunčica, if any of you have a final set of questions, comments in regards to the second session or even the most recent discussion that we've been having, please come in.
Okay, I will just end with a short comment.
Either way, Ida, Sunčica.
I didn't get your name.
I think you have to unmute.
I just wanted to tell you that affect theory. So it is not a theory of effect, and it is not theory of emotions, but of affect. Is maybe something you can find interesting, because the affect theory talks about what you're actually mentioning, and that is what is it before we feel emotions, and what is it before we actually consciously can perceive them and name them. So before that, the affect theory states the intensity and affect as a very important bodily experiences that are not it is not possible to linguistically determine them. So they are non-conscious. So I think this is something very important in Ivana's work. That's why I was talking about it. And maybe that can be also interesting for your research.
Ida, did she?
Ida, yes, she wanted to.
So I'm trying to see if I get, is it Arlette, the last person?
Yeah, exactly.
Hi,
Yeah.
Arlette. So there was a mention of Frank Jackson's 1982 thought experiment of Mary, who lives in a black and white room, and she's not capable of seeing color, and she's a scientist, she studies about color. And this was used as in philosophy of mind to talk about whether qualia matters to consciousness or not. I think you took it a very interesting direction. I had never seen people take this to a sort of a anti-colonialist sort of critique of science or knowledge, or sort of the kind of knowledge that documents from a third person perspective. And I think that was very interesting. And maybe I wanted to like amplify it, and maybe you want to say a little bit more about it. Because for me, that was in fact the effect of Ivana's work when we throughout these years that we've worked together, where I'm sort of, you know, I feel like there is a part, maybe due to the trauma of the world or something, that we want to separate from it, separate the personal experience from it and look at it from another dimension. But with her work, you're in it. There is a kind of an existential feeling of being totally sort of seeped into it, being completely like, you know, jumping into some kind of a water. That's the feeling that it has. And the whole silence and frequencies, the frequency of the heart working with the frequency of this, and then the frequency of neural networks in the brain where, you know, there's the alpha, gamma, beta, and then you're entraining the eyes with this sort of 5 to 25 hertz. I feel like there's something very interesting about tuning the frequencies of the brain to just presence and just like sitting with your inner darkness. And I feel like you mentioned something about something that I thought was very radical, if I understood you correctly, that the same way that Mary can't know what color is, you were taking the argument, I thought, and maybe I was wrong, a step further. You were saying no kind of documented written knowledge can really capture what something is when it's entirely experiential. Did I understand you correctly? Because I sense that that was a more radical claim that Frank Jackson in 1982.
When you don't experience anything, from my stand, you cannot know anything.
Anything, right. Frank Jackson thought that you can't have qualia, you can't have the experiential knowledge, but you can have the third person knowledge. You're saying, actually, you can't know anything about it. So that's you're taking his argument and making it more radical. I had not seen anyone do that, and I think that that's something that I think I resonate with. That having done science for 15 years now, I think I resonate with that more. We create this paper trail and equations and everything, and this is a dimension of knowing, I think. But you're saying if you don't know the experience, that you wouldn't consider that knowing. So I guess your notion of knowing is profoundly existential and phenomenological, whereas an AI basically could never know until it can feel pain, basically, in your perspective. So it's the hard problem of consciousness, as analytic philosophers would put it, rather than the sort of the easy problem.
Yes.
Yeah. Ivana wants to mention something.
Yeah, I actually wanted to. It's okay, I don't have to hear. So, in terms of like knowledge and experience, it's basically a question: can we not experience? So, AI, we don't know if AI can experience, but so far you're saying no.
No.
But I think humans, there is actually no way that we cannot experience. So basically, if you would cut all the senses, we are actually dead. So the brain can't really work without sensory inputs. So even if you're talking about knowledge which comes from books, this is also embodied knowledge and is somewhat coming through senses. But what do you think about this, Ida?
So I think I'm still with Arlette that there is something. So she mentioned, I think they mentioned, I don't know their gender pronoun, that the knowledge of a different culture. I think it's very important that colonialism was very much about writing things about another culture and diminishing it to a particular perspective of looking at it from another phenomenology, from another structure.
Yes.
And in that regard, no, there is no knowing of the white guy who comes to Africa of what it feels like to dance, or what the rain dance means, or what a dance means. And any amount of him writing is never going to get him there. There is no knowledge of, you know, those of us who've seen a war when we were younger, like when I was a child, you guys probably maybe in Croatia, those of us who've seen a war, there is no replacement for that embodied experience of having that uncertainty and the permanent threat. And that also makes you constantly aware and alerted, and everything is more colorful somehow. It's a different experience. The brain is producing different neurochemicals. It's not the same perception. I wasn't perceiving lines the same way that you know, a white kid with a boring life in a farm in the Netherlands was seeing lines. We were seeing things differently. And I think that systemic injustice also, like, I'm trying to build simulations to say, hey, here is something, but I also want to highlight the fact that this is something that is a structure in reality. I can show you, I can measure it for you, but you can't feel it. So you don't have a knowledge of it. You don't have the sort of the epistemic privilege to know what this is. So that science needs to be created by people who sort of feel it. It's the same thing as, honestly, like white men sort of creating tampon products. It's like, no, dude, like you have to have female scientists. So I don't know if I'm expressing myself correctly, but I just wanted to like amplify Arlette's voice, because I think there is something more radical in what they're saying. And I think that it's something radical not captured by analytic philosophy of mind as written by white men, as mentioned by, well, not all whites, like Frank, as mentioned by Frank Jackson, as mentioned by others in the philosophy of mind that is in the analytic tradition. But I think that there is something very radical in that claim that you cannot know if you can't experience it. And it is, and to answer your question, Ivana, it's possible to read something and not be able to experience it. As is the case of reading about a different culture, but you don't practice that culture, so you can't know what it is.
So I think if I could maybe add something.
To say that my question is also the way that scientific Western science is done. If we go to where the colonial problematics come from today in the epistemology, comes very much from Hegel, who was rewriting the canon, and how his perception of, if you are further away from nature, it is when you have a real will. And he was saying that there was the Africans are or the African people too close from nature to have an understanding of it. First, he has, as I have understood, never put a foot on any African region. Second, he was talking from his point of view. But what he was then doing is then saying things that are not true first, because there's, for example, one philosopher, Maniragaba Balibutsa, who was saying, actually, if he had talked to someone from any African culture, he had known about Isis and Osiris, he had known that the Greeks ideas of the immortal soul comes exactly from there. He had known about the Randese deities of Imana and all these various long-term philosophies. But I question how, when he says the more you go away from from nature, is the more you can really have an understanding of yourself. So first the African people, then the Greeks, and then he said the Germanians. And I say, but if every knowledge comes from the experience. This is where also we have an understanding of the calendar of today, from long-term, thousands of years of observing. So where do you take your experience, your knowledge from? And today, I think we reached too far in that sense, that makes this hard cut, actually, that people don't even question anymore. But the last thing I wanted to say is my understanding of the critique on how science in the Western tradition still is reduced to the brain. And it's the same way it is written. I had a hard time studying philosophy, although, I was really also, deep down there and working with a professor and being a tutor and all this. But she was always saying,
all your points are very interesting, but you write so poetic.
That's
It's too poetic. And I told her there's no difference between philosophy and poetry. And I want to say, I don't want to say radical, just any, you cannot experience anything from any writing, or you cannot understand anything just from the writing and the text. Yes, you can. When it is not, sorry, it sounds like a bit Obama now. If the writing is echoing with the frequency, then this is
I just want to say something about this writing thing, because I think we were in some point talking with Ivana about like how we like in the moment that we actually experience some extra dimension and we try to explain it, then we basically have to put it back into some like dimension or something that is visualizable or something like this. So basically like the experience that we have in the moment that it becomes able to be told or able to be trespassed has to arrive to a point of mutual agreement, which means that we both agree on this, but it's not exactly what I experienced. And this was something that yesterday also the Taita Juan mentioned, that he was, when we were asking the question, he was firstly saying like, again, this is like a very complex question to say. The only way that we can actually respond this is when you take it. I don't have knowledge to tell you this. You actually can ask the plant, or like you more some meaning that is somehow you experience it, and then you might have the answer for yourself, but it's not like a this is the
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah, I think for me, what is most interesting of what Arlette is mentioning, that I think we're hearing echoes of now, is that when you begin to try to put words to particular experiences that are embodied, very often they become flattened. And I think that this is the flattening, defining, narrowing down, which is very much needed in order to express ourselves and to trace genealogies and to put experiences out into the worlds beyond ourselves, but inevitably they will never be able to be fully captured. And I think that that's perhaps where I was sensing you were coming from, where you were mentioning it's the experience itself. Reminds me also of something that I was speaking to Bonaventura about with Elena and Ivana the other day before having the conversation with Taita Juan the shaman, where he was mentioning his experiences in Cameroon with witch doctors, we could say, where as a child he was intrigued by their processes and he wanted to inquire on what those experiences were, these mythologies were, and often he wouldn't really get a full answer, or there would be a kind of trickster answer. And I think this is, again, thinking back into the anthropological, what is it that people have been told, which also may have been a trick, or is not the full story for different varieties of reasons, of either embodied complexity or not wanting to share. So, I mean, of course, now I think we're getting into a point of the...
all cultures necessarily need to write it. And this is
of course,
yes.
Yes.
And in fact,
you know,
even
it's not
to...
needed. It's like you can...
Yes, and we were mentioning before how thinkers like Ziad Rabi, that we always quote, are mentioning that phenomenology and all the Western tradition of phenomenology is not taken into consideration with in other spaces, in other knowledge systems. There was not even a need to theorize and think phenomenology, because phenomenology is the flesh, the lived experience. So there's no theory about it. It's just the body inscribed with all these knowledges and able to Ida, sorry, I see you. And I think you have a comment also about Omar Khayyam being a scientist, a mathematician, and a poet, as you were, Arlette, mentioning. This is a oneness.
Yeah, I really like I really like that suggestion, that it's not all writing, but it's the kind of writing that's, for instance, poetic, etc. I think it comes back to the idea of translating it to a dimension of experience as opposed to a dimension of the third person, I guess, knowledge again. Because I think with poetry, what happens is that I'm given, again, a first person encounter. I think it relates to Sunčica's point that there is the point of pre-epistemology, so to speak. It reminds me a little bit of the direction that Levinas wanted to go, Emmanuel Levinas, in his post-Holocaust moral philosophy. And his idea was different. He wasn't saying that he wasn't talking about knowledge per se. He was just saying that ethics should be primary philosophy and not epistemology. We should put sort of the experience of looking at the gaze of the other, his book Infinity and Totality, that infinity with which the gaze of another person or animal refuses to become ours. We give names to animals, we try to kill others or dominate them or enslave them. And he considers that under the dimension of totality, which, obviously reflecting the sort of the Holocaust as well as slavery traditions. But then the solution that he proposes is to make primary this dimension of the experience of looking into the eyes of another. And that sort of experience in his mind, if we prioritize that kind of philosophy over knowing, over ontology or epistemology or things that are traditionally associated with ways of knowing, if we prioritize this experience, he believes this would be ethics as first philosophy, and he thinks that that would counter totality by accepting this infinity of resistance of the other to become like us or ours. I don't know, it reminded me of that, and it made me feel like poetry mostly, like you were saying, you were talking about the frequency that would resonate within a text that is poetic, as opposed to a text that's written in a kind of a scientific way. It wouldn't have that. I feel like that resonance in poetry that you're mentioning, it reminds me of the same resonance of looking into the eyes of another, so to speak. Honestly, whether it's a cat or a human, I feel like poetry lives in that maybe interaction as opposed to the other one, which is, hey, I'm going to describe to you what the color purple feels like, although you've never seen color. So that's different, I think. But I don't know if that's...
listening to your voice.
Yeah.
The many voices that are living in you.
Yes, exactly.
No, but I just want to come in for a second.
Yeah.
Sorry, we will never end.
Because actually, Ida, you're a scientist, and we are like really now going somewhat against science, and there is challenging science, but there is really kind of valuable knowledge which is coming from science, where we also have to respect its own methodology and like acknowledge that it's not the knowledge, but the poetry is also knowledge, and this goes back to your manifesto, I think. But anyway, shall we just close?
Yes, because of course we are interested in having this dialogue on a scientific, artistic level, but we're also very interested in questioning these scientific presumptions that have been created in a certain environment by certain people. So it's very important that we can do this exercise together, and that scientists themselves are ready to that. With Juan-Andres Leon, earlier in the first session, we have been really addressing the importance of understanding how rootedly imperialistic is certain scientific thinking, and how the images, like the image of the black hole that he was showing, is the result of translations and power structures that are fundamentally to be known. We cannot just give it for granted and not question. So this was a very good exercise, probably 3, 4, I don't even know, 5 hours long exercise of questioning in the very polyphonic, multivocal way. So probably people might have gotten disoriented in the very different presentations, but I think we managed to create the space for a more critical perspective and for a multidimensionality that we think we don't perceive, but we probably do already.
One little thing.
Oh, there are also many sounds. I think people are also saying.
Yes, actually, we got some messages from the team saying that we managed to successfully bring the spirit of the invocations online and even our classical lateness.
Exactly, we never end.
So I think now we're at our peak, at our end. So
Someone wanted to
Is it okay if I just say one sentence?
Oh, yeah.
So just to add to what Ivana was saying and the earlier conversation with Arlette, I just want to add that just as, Khayyam and, Avicenna and others and Al-Khwarizmi, in at least my kind of cultural heritage, I think math can be poetic, and a mathematical understanding is one of those poetic forms. Just, it's a different kind of experience. It's basically giving name to a hallucination of space into this abstract field with lines that are abstracted from what we really see and equations. I think there is a lot of magic and a lot of poetry in math. And yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Yes,
absolutely.
And not just giving name.
Oh, sorry for all the pigs.
Thank you. We have to call it the day.
Yes.
Thanks to everybody in the studio, Kathy,
all.
Arlette, Ivana, of course, Israel, Juan-Andres,
And thank you
also France that rescued Arlette, and all the guests. Ida, thanks for being with us to the end.
And also to all of the public, of course. Thank you for watching.
And the Savvies.
And the
that are
Savvies.
there supporting.
Gratitude to all.
And
Thank
making
you.